Hello, my name is Lisa Buchman, and I'm a member of an organization called the Daughters of the American Revolution. The ladies who belong to this organization are all direct descendants of people who either fought or helped to win the American Revolution. This happened a long time ago in the 1700s, and that's the reason I'm wearing a dress that ladies might have worn in the 1700s, to show you what that may have looked like. In September, we celebrate the writing of our Constitution, which is a special set of rules that were written at the beginning of the country to tell us how the country would be run. One of the important people in beginning of the country in helping to write the Constitution and get the country started was George Washington. So we thought you might enjoy hearing a book about George Washington. This is called George Washington. It's by Caroline Crowson Gilpin. Who was George Washington? George Washington was the first president of the United States. He was a farmer, a soldier, and a hero. He helped America become a free country. Throughout the book, you'll see these little boxes with coins, and each time you see that, it will tell us a new word. In this case, that word is portrait. A picture or a painting of a person is called a portrait, and this is a portrait of George Washington. Growing up, George was born on February the 22nd, 1732, on a farm in Virginia to a large family. He spent much of his time with his older brother, Lawrence. Lawrence lived on a plantation called Mount Vernon. He was an army officer, and George wanted to be just like him. Another new word, plantation. A plantation is a large farm that grows plants for food and clothing, and this is a picture of Mount Vernon, which was George Washington and his brother's plantation. This is a portrait of Lawrence Washington, who was 14 years older than George. George Washington grew Mount Vernon to a large plantation with 8,000 acres. Teaching himself. When George was 11, his father died. He had to stop going to school to help at home. But George read a lot and taught himself. When he was 17, he got a job measuring land to make maps. Measuring land is called surveying. So here is a painting of a surveyor. It's an important job, and George was very good at it. George was brave and strong. He was very good at riding horses. This helped him become a great soldier a few years later. When George was only 23, he was asked to be in charge of the Virginia soldiers. And this is a portrait of George in his uniform. Becoming a leader. In the 1700s, America was not yet the United States of America. It began as just 13 colonies ruled by King George III of England. People came on ships to live in America. They wanted more freedom than the king would give them in England. Here is a picture of King George, who was the King of England for 59 years. England is a part of Great Britain, and England is, along with Wales and Scotland, also a part of Great Britain. Here is a map of the 13 colonies, and you can see that North Carolina was one of the original 13 colonies. On this map, it shows the relationship between the colonies, which are here at the edge of America, and Great Britain, which is across the Atlantic Ocean, way far away. Another new word, colonies. That's what America's first 13 states were called before America became independent from Britain. In his time, many things were very different in the 1700s. At home, many colonists lived on farms and built most of their own houses and furniture. They used homemade candles to light their rooms. And this is a picture of candles that have been dipped in wax over and over and then are hung up so they will dry and get hard. Food. Most people grew their own vegetables such as squash, like these zucchini, and peas. They hunted animals such as deer and rabbits for their meat. Staying in touch. No cell phones, no computers. People used feather pens and ink to write letters on paper, and sometimes it took the letters weeks to reach the person they were going to. Chores and school. Children helped with farm chores. Most children, however, did not go to school. They learned how to read and write at home. Mount Vernon. Sadly, when George was 20, his brother Lawrence died. Later, George became the owner of Mount Vernon. In 1759, George married Martha Custis, and they were happy together at Mount Vernon. Martha Custis and George Washington married only 10 months after they met each other. And here's a fun fact. George Washington had no middle name. The making of a hero. In 1760s, there was trouble coming. King George III made the colonists pay extra money for tea and other supplies that they needed. The colonists didn't think it was fair, and they were angry. One way they showed their anger was in the Boston Tea Party, which is pictured here. In this event, a number of colonists dressed up like American Indians, and they threw British tea into the water in Boston Harbor, which made the British very mad. These Americans wanted freedom from England, and they asked George Washington to lead the American army against the British. George Washington was a great leader. He was smart and brave, and he strongly believed in American freedom. War and peace. The Revolutionary War started in 1775. The British thought they would win. They had more men and supplies. American soldiers didn't have enough food or warm clothes, but they would do almost anything for their freedom. In 1776, America's leaders signed the Declaration of Independence. It said America had a right to be free and to make its own rules. The British didn't agree, and they sent more troops to fight. So we have two new words, the Revolutionary War, which is America's fight for independence from Britain, and the Declaration of Independence, which is a special document which explained all of the reasons America wanted to be free from Britain and make its own decisions. These are some very special words from the Declaration of Independence, which if you haven't heard before, I'm sure you will in school. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For 8 long years, the war went on. The British were tired of fighting a war that was so far away from home. The British were beginning to run out of supplies and money. And on Christmas Day in 1776, George Washington led his soldiers across the Delaware River, which runs between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. They did this on Christmas Eve, and you can see it was very cold because the river was almost frozen. They went on Christmas Eve because they wanted to attack on Christmas a British army that was in New Jersey. Do you think the British were expecting an attack on Christmas? No, they thought everyone would be celebrating Christmas. And so George Washington and his soldiers surprised them and won the battle. They hoped that this would help them win the war. Finally, the British did give up in 1783. America had won its freedom. Here's some cool facts about George. He had false teeth that were made out of things like ivory or lead. You may have heard that he had wooden teeth. That's really not true. Can you imagine all the splinters in your mouth if you had wooden teeth? He was born on February the 22nd, but today most Americans celebrate his birthday on the 3rd Monday of that month, which we often call President's Day. George was a very good horseman. He liked hunting on horseback, and one of his favorite horses was named Blueskin. Another of his most famous horses, who he rode throughout most of the Revolutionary War, was named Nelson. He was very tall, almost 6 feet 3 inches, and he had a size 13 foot. He liked cornmeal pancakes called hoe cakes with butter and honey for breakfast. The very first president. How would this new country work? In 1787, men from each state came together to write new rules for the United States. They called these rules the Constitution. Then they had to choose a new leader. George Washington was elected the first president of the United States. In 1789, it was a big job to unite the new country. And here's another coin with the word unite. It means to bring together, to bring these new colonies together into one nation. George Washington's friend Henry Lee III said that Washington was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. George Washington became president on April the 30th of 1789. He didn't want to be called King Washington or have people bow to him like the king in England, so he asked people to just call him Mr. President. And that's still what we call our president today. Home again. After 8 years as president, George gave up his power. He was happy to go home to Mount Vernon again. He had many visitors, and he rode his horses every day. In December of 1799, George got sick with a bad sore throat. There was no medicine in his time to cure him. He was 67 years old when he died. In his honor, George Washington was greatly loved. He's the only president to have a state named after him. His face is on the dollar bill, the quarter, and a U.S. postage stamp. On this map, it shows you that Washington State is way up in the far corner. North Carolina's over here. And of course, our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., is also named after George Washington. The dollar bill, the postage stamp, and out in South Dakota, there's a very special monument in which 4 presidents have their faces carved in stone, including George Washington. It's called Mount Rushmore. Another fact, George Washington was the only president who did not live in the White House because, of course, it wasn't built yet when he was president. This is a picture of the Washington Monument. It's 555 feet tall, and that makes it the world's largest stone structure, the tallest. What in the world? Here are close-up pictures from George Washington's time. We'll use the hints below to figure out what's in each picture. I bet you can tell what this one is. But here's the hint. It helped George get from place to place. Of course, it's a horse. And this is the paper money with Washington's picture. Can you remember which bill has his picture? Yes, the $1 bill. Here is George Washington's home in Virginia. Do you remember the name? Yes, Mount Vernon. And what was George's wife's name? Can you remember? Yes, Martha Custis Washington. And this was one of George Washington's favorite things to do out of doors. He liked to fox hunt. And of course, these are the foxhounds who would help him do that. And this is the special monument in South Dakota where George Washington's face is carved in the rock. It's called, can you remember that one? Yes, Mount Rushmore. And just to look at our special words, colonies, the first 13 states in America before we became independent from Britain. The Declaration of Independence, which is a special document which tells why the American colonies wanted to be independent and rule themselves. A plantation, which is a large farm in which crops are grown for food and clothing. A portrait is a painting or a picture of a person. The Revolutionary War is the war that the United States or that America fought to be independent from Britain. And to unite, which brings people or brings the states together. And George Washington had a big hand in uniting the country. We hope that you have enjoyed this book about George Washington and hope that you will continue to study about the history of the United States of America.